the 90s, people wanted to be a rock and roll star or a DJ. And in the sort of 2000s, you wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. It had a
Mm-hmm.
sort of rock and roll feel to it.
Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Živile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox, and today we have the privilege of speaking with Mike Butcher. Mike is editor-at-large at TechCrunch and co-founder of the Europass Awards. He is a renowned figure in the European tech ecosystem and known for his insights, community building efforts, and commitment to fostering innovation. So I'm very happy that, Mike, we made it, and just with open heart, welcome to Perception Paradox.
Thanks very much for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm in the English countryside, and I have a lovely fields to roam around in. I've got some interesting artifacts here. A stuffed heron,
Oh my
and
God.
but yeah. We're recording this in the summertime in England, certainly. So that's why I'm here. But it's great to be part of what you're doing. I think I'm enjoying what you've been producing, and I thought it'd be great to join.
I'm really happy that you joined, and especially in such an English environment and keeping your signature branding, right? The leather jacket and the glasses. That's literally how
And
I think.
here's my tea.
Oh,
Here we
oh
go.
wow. The English tea,
God
right?
save the Queen.
That's so great. Cheers for that. So I was thinking immediately to jump into the topics of the Startup Awards because I'm really curious to hear more your insights. What's the relevance of that? But maybe let's go a bit back. Journalism. You're known in the startup scene, and not only about your journalism's articles, interviews from tech scene people to celebrities and many famous people as well. How did journalism come into your life?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that I was at university. I didn't really know what I was going to do. So, like anybody who doesn't know what they're going to do, of course they go and do an English literature degree. And so in that period, while I was uh, basically I got into photography. I liked playing drums. I liked English, so obviously Bachelor of Arts student. And at university, while I was at university, uh, I found out about student newspapers, and I got very into student politics and student newspapers. And initially, I started just taking photographs for the student newspaper, which was a great fun because obviously, if you're on a student newspaper, one of the best perks is to be able to go to gigs and see bands for free. So instead of paying
That's a great perk.
really probably quite a small amount of money to go and see a gig, I'd get A, up the front in front of the band, and B, I'd get to take photographs for the student newspaper. So that was a win-win. And then gradually I started to do a little bit of writing. And then one day a guy came to me and said, listen, there's some corruption going on at the university. Uh, you know, here's all the information, bang, and see what you can do with it. So I was like, wow. So I sort of went through all this stuff, and it looked like basically that the university was being ripped off by
No way.
one of the staff members. Not an academic one, a sort of one of the ancillary staff people. And what was happening was that they had this place called University House, and every time a visiting dignitary or they would come and they would bring a kind of a painting and gift it to the university and stuff. And what was happening was that this person who was running this place was taking the paintings and whatever and taking them to their house or selling them and stuff like that. So I wrote this story, and It's a very long time ago, so I won't go into too much detail. But the upshot was that the university was very embarrassed trying to get my university degree cancelled.
No
Rang
way.
my father, who at the time who was a professor at the university, and told him to reveal my sources, which he didn't, to his credit. And then I thought, boom, this is the job for me.
Oh my God. Oh.
So, because it was such a buzz, and I thought, okay, that's it, right, that's what I'm going to do. So journalism it was, and then yeah, just really just started getting in, trying to get into newspapers and things. But fast forward, it was the early 90s. By this stage, it was the early 90s, and the internet was bubbling through. You could buy a modem, stick it in your computer, and then one day I found out about an internet magazine, and so I managed to join that. So, but that's the early story of how I got into journalism.
Wow, that's pretty funny. Did you manage to finish your degree? Or
I did. I did. I managed to finish the degree. I graduated with a very, very ordinary, not particularly amazing English degree because I spent far too much time playing in bands, producing student
oh
newspapers. So I was better at all the other stuff to do with being a student than I was actually writing about Chekhov or,
yeah,
uh, or metaphysical poets or Shakespeare. So, but anyway, it was fun, and
brilliant.
I got my degree, and I went off and started my career.
That's brilliant. What a start. You keep mentioning also the music, right? And I do recall one of the after parties of the conference, you and the drums. If I'm recalling it correctly, can you tell us more about your musical path actually? Because it seems like you've been actively involved in that and you've been playing into the concerts, you love the music.
Well, I think music brings people together, doesn't it? And I had I've only ever been an amateur drummer, so but I never went professional. But I've been in bands that kind of could have gone professional or nearly went professional. I was never really worried because I always felt I was doing it for fun, so I wasn't worried about having a career as a drummer. But I mean, I'm totally dating myself, but because I was a drummer in that kind of early grunge era of the early 90s, and that was a lot of fun. I also managed to do things like play bass and sing sometimes,
Oh,
but
wow.
mostly drumming. But I enjoyed the fact that certainly of the era of the last sort of 15 years or ago, when the internet industry had really came back around about 2005, 6, 7. It really came back, and it had had a kind of a doldrum period. And at that time, actually, there was something sort of really similar to the music industry. By the way, I forgot to mention that I published a music newspaper as well when I was a kid, when
Oh,
I was
wow.
younger. So I'd been a music publisher. I'd written about music as well. And so when the internet and the web 2.0 sort of started, it was actually really similar to the early kind of a music scene because entrepreneurs were kind of like new rock and roll stars. Instead of, in they used to say that we used to say that in the 90s people wanted to be a rock and roll star or a DJ, and in the sort of 2000s you wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. It had a
Mm-hmm.
sort of rock and roll feel to it. And in fact, in the early days of when I was started out at TechCrunch, I actually put on my own event called Geek and Roller, sort of like rock and roller, but with geek in the word.
Oh my
And
God.
I combined startup pitches with music. So we'd play like a banging tune, and then we'd like have a startup pitch, and then another banging tune, and then a startup pitch, and it was quite fun because it had a music industry feel to it, like a music scene kind of feel. So I think there's a lots of kind of, I mean, at its best and at its most exciting is when you really feel like you're part of a real scene, and and I think, certainly you and I have witnessed that when you go to a tech conference or a retreat or whatever it is, and you really you connect with the community, and I think there's got that sort of music vibe to it. You're connecting about, you're not, in the same way that you connect about music, you're connecting about tech as well. So I think there's something in that as well. But it's all sort of like it's the glue that brings people together, isn't it, in a way? And
Yeah.
and I think also it's about creativity. Often we talk about technology in terms of it like, like putting a nut and a bolt together, or like an industrial process. Whereas in fact, in reality, it's actually extremely creative. It's an incredibly creative industry, and it's got almost more to do with the arts than it has to do with science and science and tech in some ways, especially when you're, creating a new technology or creating teams or working with people. It has such a sort of, it has that creative feel to it. So, but anyway, I mean, that's a long-winded way of
Hmm.
explaining why I kind of like to mix up my sort of interest in music and tech.
But it's pretty cool, especially when you are going from the print media to the digital media. You've seen all this whole evolution of journalism and in general the tech scene. When did you start covering the tech scene? Was it with TechCrunch, or how did you actually discover them?
Well, I started in the mid '90s on a magazine called New Media Age. I became the editor of that. Then I switched to an American magazine called The Industry Standard, and was senior editor on the Industry Standard in Europe, where we launched the European version. And then there was, unfortunately, that magazine closed, and there was a period of not very much happening. In fact, saying that you were in the internet industry or an internet magazine journalist was a kind of a bit of a like, oh dear, terrible. And then when Web 2 came along, Web 2 was treating the internet more like an operating system instead of, or more like a application platform. Instead of saying, here's a website and here's a bunch of emails, here's an application. And so obviously that started on the web first. And then when I was writing about that for the Financial Times and the Guardian mostly, and occasionally other newspapers and magazines. And I heard about TechCrunch, and initially I thought, oh, you know what, I'll start my own version of that in the UK. But you're talking sort of 2004, when
Wow.
really it was quite hard to actually make it work. There weren't really many ways of monetizing it. The market was still pretty small. You weren't really going to easily get a kind of a salary out of it, and and also just writing about the UK, there wasn't really much going on. Wasn't a heck of a lot going on in Europe generally, but I started freelancing for the TechCrunch in 2006, and in 2006 I was part of a small effort to try and launch a kind of a UK version of TechCrunch as a sort of a franchise. It didn't really work. And then eventually in 2007, Michael Arrington, who was the editor of TechCrunch, made me an offer to come on board and to cover um, the UK and Europe, and so I did. So that was when informally I started in September 2007 at Seed Camp, which was then an accelerator, and they launched Seed Camp. So I launched TechCrunch in
Oh wow.
Europe at Seed Camp with people like Rashman Sahoni and stuff like that. So Nicholas Zenstrom in the room. So we went to the Seed Camp event, and I wrote it up. I was like, boom, there's your first post on TechCrunch about Europe. So, but I've obviously we've been through a lot since then. But
Yeah.
it's that it was such a very early time, and there wasn't a great deal going on. But that's when I had my idea for the Europas
Oh,
Awards.
that's how it was. So how was it born? Because you've been running it, the Europa's Awards, for what? It's been 16 years now, right?
Yeah.
If I'm correct. So we just got to the beginning, TechCrunch, Seed Camp, opening. So what inspired you actually to create these awards?
Well, as I said, it was very early in those days, and I think it's always been not so easy in Europe to create scenes, because everyone has their own city and their own language and their own culture, and so it's quite fragmented. It's not like in the States where there's a kind of maybe two, max three scenes. Like, you've got San Francisco, which is the biggest scene. You've got New York, which is a tech scene, maybe Austin, but that's about it. But everyone's kind of speaks the same language, has pretty much the same culture, etc. And of course, San Francisco is the biggest, and the Bay Area is the biggest kind of ecosystem. But in Europe, it's all very fragmented. And so selfishly, I decided, listen, we need something in Europe, and we need not just to bring people together, but to also celebrate, because actually it does create a kind of vibe. So in 2008, I think, was it 8 or 9? I can't remember now. I started the Europas, and the event was started as an awards. So who in Europe is doing the best startup in enterprise stats or consumer or mobile, whatever it was, and we would just come together, sort of do some panels, have some awards, and then have a big party. Not too complicated. And and I did that for a couple of years, and then eventually I actually did a whole like 1 day conference for a few years, which was also very, very successful. And then we were just about to kind of get going and sort of and then a few years down the track, we were just about to kind of really kind of motor on this. And then unfortunately the pandemic happened. Everything had to go virtual. We did the awards virtually. And then a couple of years ago, when the pandemic sort of subsided, when I brought it back, Europa's back, kind of more traditionally back into its awards phase. But this year we are relaunching it. So this year we decided to, my co-founder and I, Diane C. Morrison, to relaunch it as a top 100 list of the most interesting and hottest early stage startups in Europe.
In Europe,
And
okay.
yeah, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is, but that's what the Europas is. It's moving forward from this year as we're relaunching on November the 11th in Lisbon. It's going to be a top 100 list, because we think that actually there's just so much going on. Europe now. It's a totally different scene from 2007, when there was so little going on, and I think it would be really useful, especially for people in the US, for instance, to find out what is going on in Europe. Like, here's like a real snapshot in time
Yeah,
of what's going on in Europe.
that is so cool. So it's going to be top 100 startups in Europe, and also going to be some kind of awards where you're going to, I don't know, select the category winners, because I've saw that you have some verticals from health tech to AI to SaaS and so on, or how
Yeah.
it's going to look like. That sounds very exciting, actually.
Yeah, well, I think the unique thing about the Europa's 100 is that we get the industry to judge it in terms of in the investors, founders, and the media. So we get journalists involved as well. So instead of being like a corporate take on what's going on, it's very much the ecosystem in Europe. So that's really important to begin with. The second thing is that because it's 100, we're going, okay, listen, we think, here our judges think this company is interesting. Now, if you have too many categories, what we found in the past is you're really trying to kind of shoehorn a startup into a category when it kind of, maybe it crosses different lines. It's AI and something else, or whatever it is. So instead of having too many categories, we just thought, let's just like look at the whole thing in the round and come up with a good list. And thirdly, yes, we will have some standout categories. So there are some certain categories which are really hot right now, and it's good to be able to flex around those things. So for obvious reasons, climate technology is still a big hot topic. Obviously, Europe has Southern Europe in particular has big issues going forward over the next few years. And so, but the climate technologies coming out of Europe are going to be able to address a lot of the big issues facing the rest of the planet more broadly. And secondly, the issue, having categories means that we can sort of flex up and down. So there's climate and defense is a big one, obviously. Unfortunately, position now in Europe where one of our close neighbors, Ukraine, has been brutally invaded by their neighbor Russia. So defense technology is a big issue, and some great technologies coming out of obviously Ukraine for obvious reasons, but also from other places in Europe. So defending our democratic principles and our democratic systems has become incredibly important. And yeah, of course, and of course AI. I mean, everybody's talking about AI always, right? So AI is being applied in all sorts of different categories. So but it's sort of across the board, and some are pure play AI companies, and some are more, AI in a vertical. So, but that I'm really excited. So because I'm hoping that this becomes a really great definitive list. You get other kinds of reports about Europe, but not very many of them actually say, listen, here's this company doing this company doing that, this startup doing that. And I think that's what we're going to come up with Europa's 100 in November.
How do you find these founders who are building great stuff? Or do they find you?
I'm a terrible loudmouth on social media. I love to talk about startups and technology, but also I go to a lot of conferences and events, so that really helps. And I think one of the big issues to do with startups that people sometimes forget is that, you can read a book about strategy and growth hacking and things like that. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's really about people. It's very much, and it's kind of like the secret to technology is it's not about the technology at all. It's actually about the people. And so when you meet the entrepreneur, meet the co-founders, meet the team, that's when you get this sort of really sense of what they're doing. There's a kind of an old phrase that the venture capitalists like to use, and I'm sure you've heard it before many times, which is, you can take the B team with the A plan, but they'll fail because they can't work out how to change the plan. Whereas if you take the A team, even if the A team has a B plan, not an A plan, they'll be able to pivot to the A plan. They'll be able to change it. So, and it just happened. It's happened so often to me in my career that I'll meet an entrepreneur. I think they're really impressive. I'm not really sure about what they're doing, but I know that they've got the skills and they've got that kind of vibe and the kind of personality that is going to be able to figure out how to make whatever it is happen. And I'm not talking necessarily about people who are good at hustling, because that's a different thing, and there's quite a lot of hustle culture around these days. I'm just thinking about how they can sort of, think about these things. Sure, there's a bit of hustle involved, but they can think quickly and they can think intelligently about what they're doing, and somewhat, and I think also dispassionately as well. So so the people are so important, and I think that's the other thing we're going to do with the Europa's 100 is to be able to is not just look at the technologies, which are always obviously very interesting, not just look at how they're backed and how they're funded, but also look at the people as well, and what's the DNA of the founders and the team, and factor those kinds of things in as well. This is because it's just so important, especially at the early stage.
Totally. I mean, it's not only about the vibe, but I like your comparison about this A people and B people, and it's all about how you play out with your teammates and how you find the way out, not being stuck with this one idea that doesn't work or this one problem. Talking about the people, actually, I'm very curious because during the Europas Awards and your whole history, you have quite some famous names in your startup list, right? Revolut, Bolt, Spotify, SoundCloud. I can continue. Have you noticed what kind of success stories or common traits among these founders? Why do you think they made it?
Let me just remind myself. We've had let me some of our winners will include SoundCloud in the early
Yeah,
days, Spotify. Spotify was won the Europas in the first year.
crazy.
um, TransferWise, which of course became Wise with Tarvet Hinkris and his co-founders there. Pipedrive, Bolt, Babylon, Go Cardless, Farfetch, Revolut, Citymapper, SwiftKey, a whole bunch of these companies. I think that the obviously it makes sense when you have this sort of early stage traction. It's a little bit easier to see that these guys are going to take off. They're going to be a rocket ship. But also, we've tracked companies who maybe didn't really look like they were going to take off. For instance, Depop, I remember Simon was the founder there. When it first started, it just looked like teenagers trying to sell their Supreme t-shirt, basically. And I was like, I mean, why would anyone do this? You can do this on eBay, can't you? And he's like, nah, we're tapping into this new zeitgeist amongst, then, of course, it was millennials. Now millennials are a little bit older, but at the time it was these sort of millennials were the super young generation, and they just wanted to take a photograph of a t-shirt or some trainers and then just put it on the app, boom, and just sell it like that. And you could see that it was almost like crack cocaine. These people were just going like, sell, buy. And it created totally its own culture. So they really leaned into it. And I think it's kind of one of those it's one of those phrases you hear about technology sometimes, that really sort of transformational technology often begins at the first instance looking like a toy. It looks a bit like a toy. Famously, the Nokia executives, when they were presented with the iPhone, said, "Oh, it's a toy. Why would you touch it? It's like, who cares?" And of course, what happened to Nokia.
Yeah.
And I mean, other things like SwiftKey was just producing little mobile games. Well, Clash of Clans, fine, okay. It seemed like a cutesy entertainment thing, and then within a year they were turning out over millions and millions of dollars inside those apps, and obviously Supercell has gone on to produce a whole bunch of breakout hits as well. Yeah, I mean, so it's in those early days you don't necessarily see how they're going to kind of take off. And I think that's our special sauce really at the Europas 100, is that myself as a technology journalist, seeing these startups in, day out. Diane, my co-founder, Diane C. Morrison, who's also a journalist, has worked on Red Herring and worked for Wired and worked for other companies, magazines and newspapers, has also sees these companies. And we've got this sort of special sauce where we take our journalistic glasses and we look at the market as well as just looking at the technology. We also kind of get a feel for the company through the people as well. So we've got a sort of good sixth sense about who's going to succeed or not.
Okay. I mean, you've seen a lot of patterns and a lot of successes and failures, right? So let's say right now we have some starting out founders who consider themselves being A players and having a strong team, considering themselves solving a great problem, and they would like to stand out and be part of Europas Awards and go through the selection and, I don't know, get into the list. What do you think? What advice would you have to such founders?
Well, if they just go to theeuropas.com, they can see all the instructions there, how to apply. One of the things we ask for is a 1-minute video, and it's quite a good way of telling if somebody can actually do this or not, because we're not necessarily looking for somebody who's going to produce like a Hollywood movie or anything, but if they can just in a short amount of time just say, look, here's the problem, here's our solution, here's how we're going to do it, here's our kind of traction or go to market, here's our team, just covering off the basics. That's just incredibly helpful, because also it's kind of like you get a sense of the person as well. I think that's really helpful, as well as just looking at simple applications. We do ask for a one minute video, and our judges, who really, we've got some fantastic judges this year. We've got some of the best VCs and investors across Europe right now. I can try and find a list, but I might look a bit silly while I'm doing it. But we yeah, so we have a brilliant list, and that video plus the information that the startups provide is a great combination. And I think we've also found that the companies that go through the Europa's Awards, Europa's 100, they get into our ecosystem. They get a lot more profile through the investors who get to see their pitch and their decks. Plus, they get to meet more media, because we always invite media and journalists and get media in as part of the process. And they also get to meet each other as well. They get to meet other founders, both physically at the event, and they also get to see who else is in the top 100 as well. So that's incredibly useful as well, especially for early stage companies, and especially as you yourself know how in Europe it is fragmented, and this is a great vehicle, a way to bring people together.
Yeah, I mean, community is important if you're in the startup scene to elevate the growth, especially from the similar industries, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
that's amazing. But Mike, can you tell us more about, in general, I would say, I don't know if that's the right way to say philanthropic work. You've been involved in so many different communities and building yourself, right? The Techfugees, also the TechVets. I saw that with Techfugees, you are kind of relaunching some activities. How did that come into your play and your agenda?
Well, I'm in a very privileged position where I have a decent following and a reasonable voice in the industry, and I don't like to just write about startups and investors and stuff. I think to myself, listen, if I've got this platform, why don't I use it for something that might be useful to people who are less privileged than I am? And I had this idea a long time ago to do something around the issue of refugees. When I was a child, my father took me to a refugee camp, which was in England. Now, probably a lot of people don't know that in the late 1970s in England, England actually housed a lot of refugees that were coming from war-torn countries like Vietnam, countries that had been flooded like Bangladesh. And in the old days, people had a lot more kind of compassion for refugees. We would go like, this is a disaster. Let's send some troops. Let's send some aid. Let's help people. I think because when I was a young child, in the late 1970s, my people still had a memory of what it was like to be a refugee because of the Second World War. And it was still in the kind of ecosystem and still in society and in culture to understand what it meant to be a refugee, how awful it was. And so I was at primary school. I remember my dad took me and a whole bunch of kids and drove this kind of rickety old van to a refugee camp in the English countryside in an army base. And we handed over, cans of baked beans and things like that. And then all us kids played with the kids and I think they were from Bangladesh at the time. I think there was a huge amounts of flooding at the time. It was a mixture of Vietnam and Bangladesh. And that really sort of impressed something upon me. So when eventually, many, many years ago, I'm at TechCrunch, I've got this voice in the industry. And in 2015, when Europe experienced a huge influx and wave of refugees from Syria, something like 11 million Syrians were displaced in 2015 because of the civil war and the brutal crackdown by the Assad regime. A lot of European countries took those refugees in, took them to their heart. Germany took in 1 million refugees from Syria. You know what's happened? There are fantastic Syrian restaurants all over Germany now. It's amazing, fantastic food. And Britain took in some, but not many. But being part of the technology industry, I thought to myself, hold on a second. Right, we're supposed to be innovators. We're supposed to be able to come up with solutions quickly. We're supposed to be whiteboarding and prototyping and you name it. So if the traditional the traditional non-governmental organizations, the NGOs like UNICEF, UNHCR, have struggled with this stuff, why can't we use technology to scale solutions? So it was a bit of a kind of slightly dumb idea, maybe a bit naive. Oh, let's build an app to solve the refugee crisis. Yeah. But I was like, oh, why not? What the hell? What have we got to lose? So we did a weekend hackathon, and one day I was walking along in London, and I just thought to myself, refugees, refugees, Techfugees. So I came up with this word, Techfugees, and I said, right, let's do a conference and a hackathon. 9 days later, I had a conference in London with about 300 people, VCs, entrepreneurs, engineers, designers, coders. We had a conference, then we had a weekend hackathon. A whole bunch of ideas came out of that. Some of them even still going to this day. And then we just thought, well, we've got to keep going. So we sort of carried on going. And then we did some other events. Other people said, let's do a Techfugees hackathons. We had one in Norway, had a whole bunch in Australia, Canada, Germany, France. It was just amazing. I think it was the great thing about the technology industry is that, and startup, especially the startup ecosystem, is that people thought, listen, we're innovative. Let's try and do something quick, fast, help. We had in Norway, I remember there was was it Sweden, an app called Come In, where you could have dinner with a refugee family, and Bureaucrazy in Germany will help refugees navigate paperwork in the German bureaucratic system. So there was also some great, beautiful flowering of ideas, and so in 2015 we just thought, well, let's just keep going. So we created a whole organization. A fantastic entrepreneur called Josephine Gub became the CEO, and we just carried on. So over the years we've built out a great network around the world. Most recently, our CEO Raj was built it, kept us going during the COVID crisis, and then I took over roughly around 2023 to sort of take it to another stage. During the Ukraine crisis, we set up like 50 WhatsApp groups for people to get out of Ukraine, for refugees, to help Ukrainian refugees. But fast forward to this year, and this year we're relaunching Techfugees. And the idea is to take all the learnings that we've done. We've literally just worked on creating access to content and healthcare learning and content and education in Kenya, in a refugee camp with a company called EDD, Edge Devices, with solar powered stuff. And we're now relaunching Techfugees. I can't go into all the detail right now, but if you go to techfugees.com, techfugees.com, you can click the link and get involved and hear about when we're relaunching later this year. The idea, though, is generally, the short version is to create a platform for companies, individuals, and NGOs to get involved in issues. But we're also going to broaden it out, not just refugees, but humanitarianism more generally, climate, healthcare across the emerging world. Because I think that the technology industry does want to get involved in these big issues, and often it doesn't quite know how to. But I'm excited, and I hope that you guys can get involved and join us.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing all the history behind. And I think it's great there are people like you who are doing that and gathering other people and leading with by example and not leaving someone behind because there were shitty circumstances that you were born in a country that where there is no peace and it's not your
Yeah.
fault. And that's really, yeah,
I mean,
at least,
we don't get to choose where we're born, do we?
yeah.
So, it's the luck of the draw. So what's wrong with those of us who have been born in kind of more wealthy countries to help those others who are in a more difficult circumstances?
Yeah. And that immediately brought me actually one thing and one concept of in the communities, mentorship. What is your experience with mentorship actually? Are you doing any of it with people who are breaking through into the startup scene or maybe other parts of life?
I mean, as a journalist, I don't really have a lot of time to do mentoring, um, but I think that I suppose I have accidentally mentored some entrepreneurs, perhaps because because
That
perhaps,
happens.
well, I guess a bit of advice here and there. One of the things I think that is often not very well understood, and I don't blame anyone for this, is that people don't really know how to deal with the media.
Hmm.
Uh, and they think that the media is like out to get you and stuff like that. And especially in the technology media, I don't think that's really most of the time that's not really the case. But what's of course, there are sometimes bad actors which the media has to report on, but the biggest sort of misunderstanding is technology entrepreneurs not really knowing how to tell their story, how to get out there, how to deal with journalists. And it's not their fault because they don't know how a journalist works. They don't know how a journalist operates and what they're looking for. One of the things I often say is that just existing doesn't make you a story on a website like TechCrunch or The Verge or The Information or Business Insider or whatever. Just existing isn't enough. You've got to have a story. You've got to talk about what the problem is. Get us excited about the problem that you're solving. Um, those kinds of things. So uh, often I can hear an entrepreneur pitch to me, and then I sort of pitch it back at them. So I say, so you're saying X, Y, Z, but I don't do it in the way that they would talk to me. I do it in the way that the media would write about it, and would try and maybe get a bit excited about it. And often that's actually sort of mentorship in a way because it's so different the way that we think about things compared to how they think about it. That's often quite helpful. So I think I've sort of accidentally mentored some people because they just don't necessarily know what they're sitting on. Sometimes entrepreneurs have just brilliant stories,
Yeah.
either personal stories. They're maybe immigrants from another country, have had terrible background, tough upbringing. They've come up with an amazing solution to certain things, or they're just like incredibly geeky, don't really know how to talk about what they're doing, but what they've come up with is something potentially transformational for people's lives. And they just sort of shrug their shoulders. Oh, yeah, I did a thing, and then they kind of like. But in my world, we're always interested in those kinds of unusual stories.
Hmm.
So so yeah, giving people that perspective, I think, can be very helpful. And it's not something you get necessarily from other mentors because a lot of professional mentorship is things like, are you getting enough sleep, or how do you deal with your team and stuff like that, which is just something that I think and lots of people in business can do, but it's not often not a lot of people in journalism. You don't necessarily encounter tons of journalists all the time, so that's a
Yeah,
bit more unusual, perhaps.
totally. What are the major mistakes of founder approaching PR person to write an article you've noticed?
Approaching a journalist, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Approaching
Um,
the journalist for some article or some exposure. Something what you would read
yeah.
and would say, no,
Well,
not again.
yeah. Just saying you exist isn't enough. So I think talk about the problem you're solving first. Make the journalist try and get the journalist interested in your problem. Um, you don't sometimes you like I said, people can talk about funding rounds and things like that, but don't forget that who you are as a person can also be quite interesting as well. Um, you perhaps someone in your family had cancer, and you decided to sort of dedicate your life to creating sort of some sort of AI solution in healthcare, or the background stories often matter more in a way than you think, because when people are reading the media, they're often very attracted to real personal stories. And I think who you are is often very interesting. I remember a startup called LV, created by a woman founder around breastfeeding, and came up with a very innovative breast pump for women who are nursing their children. And this is just it's such a great story because it's a woman founder creating something for other women. So um, that sounds like obvious, but often sometimes people sort of forget these angles. I mean, I think the basics anyway when you're approaching a journalist is be concise, talk about the problem. Don't be very long-winded. Keep it pithy, short. Um, uh, don't DM me on my Instagram. I mean, come on, guys. You know.
Does that happen often?
I mean, whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
you get a lot. People send me entire PDFs on my WhatsApp. I'm like,
they're
just,
trying.
just it's going to get lost. Fine, you
Yeah.
got my number from somewhere, but just don't do that. It's not cool. If you want to, I've got a set of questions I always ask entrepreneurs just to get them through a process fast. And but the But also, I think that one of the things that people forget is that they're working on a problem. Working away in a cave, effectively underground. Working away on the app, and the whole world is moving on. Doing something, creating. Apple launches something, and then sort of 6 months later, the entrepreneur appears and goes, "Ha ha! Eureka! We've launched our thing," and that app or that startup or whatever it is was relevant 6 months ago because the world was doing something around that time. Apple was launching something for exactly that, but they've been in their cave, in their co-working space or whatever, in their office, building that company, and they don't realize it that was the moment to jump on it and go, hey, here we're building that. Everyone's talking about this subject. Boom, we're building something around that. And then, try and get in the media in some way, or put out some social media, even yourself, and talk about it rather than waiting for, when we've all kind of moved on, the
For
world
the
has moved.
perfect moment when it's
Wait
all
for the perfect moment. Yeah.
but that's very
Actually,
often.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think we miss opportunities and shots if we're too slow in a way. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be finalized, but speak about it. Put the word out there. And you know
Get
what I
it
really liked? Yeah, when it comes to this PR, I do recall maybe one from your panels or something on your website where you were sharing an advice for everyone. Guys, if you want to get in touch with journalists, there's do your research. Go read what are they talking about. Maybe it's not the right person to approach to with your great problem, and then you will lose your motivation because it's just you did not do your homework. So I really liked it because it's also on your website. What do you write about? What do you cover? Who should approach you? So I think that's super smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so obvious, but it happens very rarely. People
Yeah.
will approach a journalist, and that journalist is writing about, let's say, enterprise SaaS or something, but their startup is completely about consumer technology or something, or a consumer hardware device. And so that's the wrong person. Like, you are wasting your time and you're wasting the time of the journalist. Um, so you really should, you should sort of think about it like a funnel. Think about who you want to reach as an entrepreneur. What's the audience? Do you want to reach consumers? Do you want to reach enterprise buyers? Who do you want to reach? Find out who that audience is, find the media that they read, then in the media that they read, find the titles that they read, and then in each title, find the journalist who writes about the thing that you are. Boom. That's the person you want. That's the person you need to get to know. That's the journalist you need to follow on X or Blue Sky or Threads or whatever it is. When eventually X falls over and disappears into a void, or
Bingo.
somebody else buys it and actually does something useful with it. And yeah, find that journalist, or find that sort of 4 or 5 journalists that are the right kinds of journalists who write about the things that you do, and then go after them because they've got the audience.
Yeah.
They're on the magazine or the website or the newspaper that is speaking to the audience that you are trying to reach. Now, TechCrunch, for instance, is read by a lot of investors and a lot of entrepreneurs, but not necessarily by loads and loads of enterprise systems buyers. So if you need that audience, you need to go for, people running on ZDNet or something, or Computer Weekly or something. So just think about that before you do all the media outlet reach. Zero in on who you really are trying to reach and the audience you're trying to reach, and find the journalist with that audience.
Brilliant. I have one more actually practical question on behalf of the founders who are listening, because myself, I've been working with many startups, and we would talk about PR and how should you contact the journalist, how you should get the message out there. And I've noticed I'm not sure if these are the misconceptions, so please share your views, that a lot of news are about either fundraising, like some closed rounds, or some kind of C-level executives hires. Is it that's where founders usually fall for, or is it's a misconception of the some of the founders, I guess?
Actually, I think probably it's the least interesting thing is when they get a C-level executive hire. That's usually really uninteresting. Now, there is a case to be made for why funding rounds are important news hooks. And now, you've got to remember, though, this isn't necessarily the story. It's a way in. It's like the gateway to the story about the company, and it is let's face it, it is a news event to some extent. I think in 2024 and going forward to 2025, I think it's worth thinking out of the box, in not just things like funding rounds and stuff. I think one of the sort of things that's not really talked about much is how much more interesting it is to write about a company that other people are talking about. So when a journalist hears about a company, not from the original company, but from other people, that's usually a really good signal that you're onto something. Now the journalist thinks they're a detective, and that they're getting kind of the buzz out of actually finding something that other people don't know about. So creating buzz in a community and just getting your natural customers and your natural audience fired up about what you are is often a great way of getting coverage, because all of a sudden your journalist thinks like, right, I'm on the story. And then all of that will do the heavy lifting for you in the way that in the way of getting media coverage. So that a lot of sometimes entrepreneurs think, oh, I must go and talk to a journalist. You know what? Create a great product. If you create a great product, then people will talk about you and you'll get the buzz, and then the media will come knocking on your door. So don't forget about the ability to create a great product in the first place, and let that do the heavy lifting for you when you eventually need to speak to media.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget that first of all, we need to solve the problem and talk to our customers, or not to try to solve our own single people problem. I see it often happening actually, but it is how it is. You try, you learn, you fail. But Mike, we're getting closer to the end, and I have a couple of more questions for you, more personal. So one of them is about you're traveling through the conferences and your, I would call it performance on stage, right? Interviews, emceeing, a lot of interviews and grilling. Do you still feel nervous getting on stage, or it's for you just regular day at the office?
It's funny. I used to feel nervous, but it's like anything. The more you do it, the less nervous you get. And now, actually, I get. I mean, I feel like the most natural place for me is to be on stage.
So outside stage, you're like, oh, what should I do now?
I don't know. I'm such an egotist, unfortunately. No, but I think I think if gradually you get to um, you get a lot I get a lot of buzz about out of I mean it sounds I think a lot of people would think it sounds terribly boring, but I do actually get a lot of buzz about having a really good decent conversation on stage with a founder or an investor. Usually I prefer one-on-ones because then you get to create a kind of an atmosphere. um, you get those kind of mic drop moments which are just
Hmm.
killer and just you can't reproduce. The time I sat down in front of one of the uh, co-founders of SoundCloud in Berlin about let's see, about maybe 8 years ago or something, and sat down and just said, "So you fired half your staff, you haven't raised another funding round. How's it going?" Uh,
Oh, ouch. So,
um, it was, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? But
oh my God, it does.
listen, this is that what journalists do, and and that you get to find out who that person is, because if they react badly, well, you kind of withdrawing the curtain back, aren't you? Um, Oliver Samwer, who is sort of a little bit like my Voldemort. I had to interview him a couple of times. I think only the last time I interviewed him was I said, "Well, you've just floated on the stock exchange in Germany. Your share price has tanked 30%. What do you do next?" And he said, "I thought this was going to be a nice interview, Mike." Um, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think it's the most fun is when you think you're going to interview someone who's maybe not going to be super amazing, super interesting, and then they turn out to actually be brilliant and have a real great story to tell. Um, that's often, and I think often those people, they're often very humble. And then when you sort of unpack them on stage in front of an audience, even they gradually lose their nerves and they just go like, "Well, I had a tough time, nothing worked, we did this, it worked, and now here we are," kind of thing. And so that's always quite fun as well. But yeah, I mean, one of the things about because thank God, COVID is over and we all came back after that and can go
Totally.
back to conferences and events. I think people just love it, don't they? Because they're just, doing virtual events was so tough. And it was just, you can't create atmosphere, can you? So it's just so nice to be back, and cross fingers, cross my heart and touch
That
wood,
it continues.
carries on like that.
Hopefully. Okay, well, that's brilliant answer. But and when it comes to your panels and stage time, do you still prepare, or it just comes naturally to you, or you just do some research and then you see where the conversation leads?
I think, well, I hope that the difference between a journalist interviewing somebody on stage and just, somebody who's just been picked to be the moderator is that we will do our research. There's a kind of a difference. We'll do our research into the person, the company, the background, the product, the and but all that you can do all of that research, but then you have to be able to be flexible on stage. You have to think on your feet while you're doing it and listening to the answers, not just asking about a list of questions. Listening is so important as well. Those are the sort of the key issues, and I think the good thing about being in the media is that we can ask questions that not everybody can ask, because maybe that person who's the moderator and who's in business or something has to meet that person and do a deal with them next week or something. So we're much more independent. So I think that's a real difference. Sometimes people forget the difference between someone who's a journalist in the media and someone who's not in that role on stage, because you'll get a lot of softball questions. You won't really hear anything interesting. So yeah, definitely prep is 100% part of the job.
Cool, very good answer actually, and thank you for identifying the difference between someone who is from a journalism background coming to interview and someone who is not. I could clearly actually sense, and especially when it's over prepped, though those, sorry about that, boring questions one by one, and when someone who is interviewing is not listening for someone who is on stage and just go one question after another because we prepared, that's the worst.
Totally. But also I would include, say, good podcasters, good content people who know their stuff, can do that same kind of role as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I have actually a lot of questions for you, but I do believe that there is always time for part two, to reflect on the Europas 100, for example, top founders and so on, which would be very interesting to follow. But my final question, I've been having it in the back of my head: personal branding and your identity. And I already mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, and you also mentioned when you joined TechCrunch, glasses and your leather jacket. Where is that coming from? Is it from your music era? Is it from your startup scene? Because I think it's really your identity in a way in the startup scene, from the pictures on TechCrunch and everything. And even now we spoke, wait, I'm going to grab my leather jacket, Where is that coming from? Which is brilliant. I love it.
Well, look, I'm not somebody who's into personal branding, and I think you can also tell that, can't you, that if something is not authentic. And I think if I have a kind of appearance, it's because I have to wear glasses a lot of the time, and B, what happened was, back in the day, I've been a drummer in the music industry, and I would wear a leather jacket, like, when I was going out on my, not for work or whatever, just going out, having drinks or whatever. And I'm obviously from an era where, you had to turn up in a suit all the time. But when I started covering the startup industry, it was quite an informal place. So I thought, oh, okay, fine, I can wear my jacket. So I'll just wear my leather jacket. So I don't have to wear a suit anymore. So I just I'd go to a hackathon or a tech conference, and I wouldn't have to wear a suit jacket on many years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this is good. Apart from anything else, I can fit my chargers in here and my phone and my notebook and
so you need nothing. You need just the jacket. That's it.
The bag. I just put everything in the jacket, and sometimes joke that my jacket's my handbag, and my man bag, and so I started wearing that. But then I'd go to the informal things with the hang out with the geeks and the entrepreneurs who would all like be in casual clothes and hoodies and stuff. But in that situation, nobody else wore a leather jacket, so I'd sort of stand out from the kind of hoodies. And but then if I went to the kind of VC meetups or the VC drinks, those guys would all be in suits. But if I wore a leather jacket, I would look different. So I thought, hold on a minute. So this worked for both sides of the table. So let's go with that then. So, and then many years ago, I had a photograph taken of me going like this, like that to the camera.
That's the photo I recall. I think it was everywhere all over the internet.
And the story behind that, I was with a photographer called Dan Taylor. We were in Istanbul. It was 2 a.m. We were in a nightclub. And I said, hold on a minute. I put my drink down, took a photograph next to this thing. Boom, that was the photo. And then the next day, I said, actually, that's pretty good. And he said, yeah, I think that's pretty good too. So that's the photo. So and I just thought, okay, fine. And there's a famous photograph of Michael Caine, who was a Hollywood actor, British Hollywood actor in the 60s, who did this whole photo session with a photographer called David Bailey, like this. And I thought, I'll pretend to be Michael Caine, and that was a joke. It was a joke. And then I thought I put it up ironically because it made me look silly and like a kind of like, who's this guy? And then I just thought, oh, you know what? I'll just keep it, whatever. So yeah, so it became a kind of a thing. And to this day, I still find it very useful having a leather jacket because I can still keep my chargers everywhere, and my notepads and my pens and my phones and stuff. So what the hell? Just go with it. But I'm not really a branding person. It's more like how
Yeah,
can
it's
I.
not. It's you're an authentic person, and you yourself, without being into the branding, it just became part of your identity and who you are, I guess. And nowadays, people call it the brand. But that's really a great story. Thank you for sharing. Because in one of the conferences recently, I have had a conversation about how do you dress and how do you feel, and sometimes people putting on the masks and going into environment just because they have to, not because they want or because they feel like that's the way they can express themselves. And it's really great to see an example where, yeah, you
Yeah.
just change the suit into your jacket and, oh, that's me. I'm going to stay true to myself, authentic, and I still stand out. Let's see where it goes. It's
Well,
amazing.
I think because we now social media and especially things like TikTok have really taken off as such a visual medium that people are very concerned about what they look. And I think unfortunately there's also, let's be honest, there's a little bit of sexism in a way because, I'm a guy, I can get away with having walking around in more or less the same kinds of clothes all the time. But women often don't get that, get judged by what they, oh, she's wearing the same top again, kind of thing. I think women don't get the same, sometimes don't get the same, same reception, which I think is really not fair. I mean, we used to make jokes about Mark Zuckerberg, or not care too much about Mark Zuckerberg having like 7 T-shirts all the same color,
Yeah.
and it became like a thing. And then gradually, obviously, when he got married and he had kids, and he kind of chilled out a bit, and obviously he's changed. He's obviously had some kind of advice, I think, because
I've
he's not.
just seen him, by the way. He got into some style, some new kind of
Yeah,
outfit. I was like, wait, 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 where is your t-shirt?
I think there's a little bit of branding going on there. Let's
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
honest. Um,
100%.
necklace, okay.
I mean, you
Yeah,
need
where's
to
my
fit to
necklace,
Gen
Mike?
Z.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Look, honestly, I think just let your personality shine through. Screw what you look like. Doesn't matter really. At the end of the day. And I think, well, the media, we don't care what you look like, frankly. I mean, yeah, it's just, just be yourself, frankly. Just be yourself. That's it.
Brilliant. Do you have any final thoughts or advice to anyone who is listening right now for us?
Um, well, is there anything in particular?
Not necessarily, maybe something what's top on your head for someone who is building the company or want to get into entrepreneurship and right now just listen to the episode, got hooked, inspired, and okay, where do they start?
Well, I think, it does go back to what you're doing, what's the problem you're solving. Don't lose sight of that. I think because we're living in such a highly social media filled era that people can think about too much about what do you look like, how do you sound, can you do X, Y, and Z, in terms of social. And I think you need to, you're going to get a lot further in life not worrying about those things and just, getting, you know, marrying up that problem that you really feel passionate about, that you really want to solve. And then if, obviously telling that story is when you kind of come out into the world, and that's fine. And then maybe you will eventually learn how to pitch and talk better about what you're doing. But don't worry, but just going after the thing that you really feel passionate about. It's like those Venn diagrams, isn't it? What you're
Mm-hmm.
passionate, what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and that thing in the middle is kind of what you should, concentrate on. So I think that's really important. And so yeah, and I think there are a lot of siren. I think one last thing I want to say is I think there's a lot of what you might call siren voices, which are really trying to politicize everything that we do all the time now. We're going into a US election. We just had quite difficult UK election. There was lots of controversy. There's lots of talk about immigration and la 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 and acceleration and deceleration and growth and degrowth. And I think we should, all of us, and especially in the technology industry, because really it's technology should be fairly dispassionate, and it should really be about how we making classically changing the world for the better. The whole politicization of things, I think, is just not a great way to go into this. That are you on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence? I think let's look at this scientifically. We've got to heal the planet because quite clearly there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. You know, that the most important majority of scientists believe that. Those are the things we need to do. So let's get down and do them, and not, just, I think we should just depoliticize a lot of the things that we do in the technology industry, and just let's solve some real problems.
Amazing. I think that's a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Mike, coming here and joining Perception Paradox. Big honor. And everyone who tuned in today for the episode, thank you for listening. And I hope to see you all 11th of November, Lisbon, the Europas Awards. And it's not an ad, it's truly what I believe. And I'm bringing out stories here where I can resonate, believe, and I feel should be heard and should be spread. And yeah, thank everyone for listening, and see you next week. Thank you, Mike, so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stopping.